But is everyone here now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So today we're talking about urban versus rural life, you know, living in the city versus not living in the city. Did you have a look at the articles, the reading material, and the video for this one?
Partially, yes.
So unfortunately, I sent it to Denise too late, so that's my fault. So he
Okay.
saw it only today at after 2 o'clock. So
Okay.
it's a shame
Well, I
on
mean,
me.
it's kind of, I mean, interesting. I think you probably, you know, are familiar with the basics of it. That was interesting because there was one that was maybe based on India, which is maybe a different sort of, well, English-speaking world, but maybe a little bit different dynamic in that sort of thing. But maybe let's just start talking about this whole city life versus country life and lifestyle. And I think it's going to be an interesting topic to discuss. So let's start with the first question. And I think we know the answers for all this one, but are you an urban dweller or a rural dweller? And do you like this arrangement? Elia, let's start with you.
I think mostly I'm an urban dweller because I like big cities. When I first came to Samara, I thought that it's not enough big for me. Not the population, but I like the cities, not even the amount of population, but I like when the people are different from different countries, different nationalities, with different cultures. So it is very interesting, I think, to live in such a city, and that's why I like Moscow very much, and big cities, mostly capitals. But I know that abroad there are many even small cities with lots of different people in them. So I don't know. But I think I prefer big cities.
Okay. Okay, Denise, what about you?
I'm only urban dweller. For me, it's very important to have a lot of different possibilities to spend time, to learn something new, to visit some art place or theater, something else. So for me, it's very important to live in a big city. And in Russia, most of them only two really very full of possibilities cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg mostly. But in Europe, I find that yes, there are many meaningfully small cities than Moscow or St. Petersburg, or even Rostov, where I was born, that are very interesting places and full of different interesting theaters or art places or something else. So for me, it will be very interesting to try live in most interested but smaller city than Moscow. But now I have only one ability for me. It's continually in Moscow now.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'm also an urban dweller. I'm looking at a squirrel climbing on a power line and in a tree at the moment. So that's kind of a strange sort of city versus, you know, rural sort of thing, maybe more of a suburban thing. But I definitely always lived in big cities my entire life. And, you know, when it comes to maybe convenience and having things like power or water and things like that, yeah, I mean, that's always there. And it's that sort of convenience, I guess, that maybe when it comes to the number of people in big urban settings, I'm not exactly happy with that situation. And that's why I'm leaning towards maybe changing my living arrangement. Anyway, we'll talk more about this later. Have you ever lived in another setting? Denise, I mean, do you have any rural experience?
not poor, but partially yes. All my early years, I lived in a small part of Rostov, which was really looks like a village. It's sometime ago it was a really village near town, and then when town grow around, this village became a part of city. But there was a non I don't know how it's to street without any coverage. I don't know how to.
A street without any what?
Any coverage, no asphalt, no
Oh,
any
like
blocks.
gravel road or dirt road or something like this.
Yes,
Yeah,
dirty road. Yes, dirty road.
a
There
dirt
was
road. Dirt road. Yes, dirt
dirt,
road.
dirty road. Many trees around houses. Very big yards, and that was really looks like a village.
Okay, okay. And but I mean, location wise, is it really a village? I mean, is it close to the more urban city,
Uh,
proper city, or?
yes, it was very close, but there was a near 10 minutes up to nearest bus stop, and it was part of city really. But in that region, it was like some kind of countryside with a small river with a very big green territory. I like bike throughout this part of the time.
Okay, okay. Elia, what about you? Any rural experience? I don't know.
Uh, mm, first, my rural experience, if I can say so, I was at my age of 7 when I graduated from the first grade at school. We came here, so I was born in Tashkent, so we came here to visit our Russian relatives. So it was not, they lived and live now not in Samara, but 200 kilometers far from Samara, in a small village, and near there is a large and dark forest. So yes, it was so wonderful for me as far as I remember my childhood, because I could run under the rain with that um, rubber boots full of dirt and full of happiness. So I remember that was really great.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I mean, what a change. What a, like touch of nature sort of experience. I've lived in another setting. I mean, it's really not maybe the right word because it's never been a full-time arrangement, but in Russia, I had this dacha where I would go during the summer for a few days at a time. But again, a few days at a time, it's not a long setting and it's not throughout the year. So I think there's a big difference. And similar situation in Croatia. We have this family, I guess you can call it a dacha. It's this, house in the countryside, without electricity or running water or stuff like that. And again, you can go there for some time in the summer, say. And we actually installed these solar panels, so you get some electricity, but very, very little. And it has to be sun, and it has to hit the, solar panel at the right time. So it's really, I mean, it's nice to live there. I really do enjoy it. But when it comes to little things, just like maybe, keeping milk cold or something like that, it's, a bit of a challenge. But I don't know, I really like it, and I really wouldn't have a problem. I know that, winter, we've been there too, and you have to keep the heat going all the time. You got this stove and fireplace, and you've got to just keep on putting the wood in all the time. So it is a lot of work to do that. But for me, I don't know, it's like the difference is that you have your open space and you have your fresh air, and you don't have the noise and the crowdedness of the city. So yeah, we have that, and it's nice. I don't know. It is nice, I think. So, what do you think are the benefits of living in an urban setting, and are there any drawbacks? Denise, what do you think? What are the benefits of living in an urban setting, and can you think of any drawbacks of living in that urban setting?
Drawbacks is okay. Hi, translation. So benefits, it's a bunch of possibilities, like better selection for different jobs. It's higher salaries, many possibilities for leisure time, like theaters, museums, some science conferences or technological conferences. It's and so on. So you have no problem if you're interested in something, you can find some relative things, or you can find people with the same interest in the same hobbies. It's a benefits of big cities. But another side, it's a very fast and hard life rhythm. It's a spending much time on transport, and probably lack of ecology, but it's more difference between countryside and cities, because to my mind, in a small cities, ecology situation is poorer than capitals.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair enough. And Elia, what do you think? What do you think are the advantages and drawbacks of living in a city?
I think yes, there are certain advantages living in a big city, because life is not only faster; it is much more verificated, much more interesting, different maybe. So you've got lots of possibilities, lots of people, lots of acquaintances with different peoples and different cultures, and so it makes your mind and your imagination about the world broader, I think. So, and people become more flexible and can take faster decisions living in big cities. But I'm not sure whether they are more free, because I think that people in small cities and even in villages, in some sense, maybe they are more free, because they can do what they want, really, and sometimes it they don't depend on so much. They don't depend so much on political situation. I don't know, on everything what is happening around them. So I'm not sure about that, but that is my experience, that they don't depend so much like the citizens of big cities. So in that
Yeah.
sense, they are free, I think. More happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand what you mean. It's a really interesting difference. And I think that when you look at Russia, for example, you see things a bit different than, say, in the United States. Just because of how, and I mean, to a certain extent, yes, look, we move to cities. That's basically, in many cultures and many societies and countries, a sign of success. Why? Because cities are where there are people. Cities are where there are schools and hospitals and universities and culture, theater, all of these things that are made possible by the higher number of people living in this urban environment. And that's, I think, what has drawn jobs, jobs. Before, when the beginning, it was these industrial jobs, it was factories, it was, this sort of industrial revolution, and then it turned into office jobs and technology. And I mean, that's the thing. Cities have always been associated with the place where you can go, the place where there's opportunity, where there are jobs, where you can make money, where you can, have this culture and everything else. And I think that, yeah, it's pretty much what we have understood culture and success to be in modern society. But at the same time, you look at a lot of people who are self-sufficient, and people who are living in cities are very rarely self-sufficient. I mean, yeah, sometimes you have your backyard garden. I know a lot of people who do. And it is possible. It absolutely is possible if you have some sort of land, which if you're living in a high rise in an apartment building or something like that, chances are you don't. Maybe there's some community garden you can participate in, which of course, you have in different areas, different parts of the world, depending on, the sort of dynamics and demand for that sort of thing. Maybe even on your balcony, you can be growing parsley or something. But there is a difference, and there is a difference of having your own land and being able to, I don't even have chickens and your own sort of thing like that. And I think that maybe one of the biggest drawbacks that we have of urban life is the fact that we aren't self-sufficient, that we are so dependent on the city providing our electricity and our water and our heating and all of these things, that we really have lost the ability to take care of ourselves, which, all right, maybe not even our grandparents, maybe our great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents were able to do because they had to. But our generation, for generations now already, we've become so dependent on these services being provided to us for a cost. And I think that what you see now is a lot more people, at least in the United States, and this is something that, again, it's maybe a slowly growing thing, that you have people who are wanting to get back to nature. And I know that in Russia, there were similar things too, that there were these maybe sort of semi-communes where people were going to go back to a more community-based living environment, where one person participates here, then you get the land and the housing that way. But really, when you have to contribute in order to live, to survive. And I think, again, this is maybe what we understand to be not comfortable living in cities, growing up in cities. Why should you grow your potatoes when you can go to the store and buy them? But what happens, and this is, I think, the sort of drawback of city life, what happens if one day those things aren't available? I think that maybe we in the cities are going to be at a huge disadvantage to the people who do have farms and land and can take care of themselves. But, hopefully that day will never come. I just think that still that lack of self-sufficiency is a big drawback for living in cities, but it's just sort of the natural evolution of living in cities. Because things are easy, we don't have to take care of ourselves. But then what about the rural setting? What do you think the benefits of living in a rural setting are, and are there any drawbacks there? Maybe, Elia, can you explain to us a little bit what you think about that one? Benefits and drawbacks of the rural setting.
So, as I said that before, and quite right, you've mentioned it, that they can eat what they have and they don't depend on it. So I remember that the 90s, when it was rather difficult with everything in Russia, and with sometimes with eating too. So that my very relatives who lived in the countryside, they even didn't mention that period of time because they didn't depend on them, and um, frequently, no, to tell you the truth, we also used lots of products from that our relatives too, so they helped us much uh, in that difficult years. So from this point of view, from this position, of course they feel themselves more independent and more, I don't know, how is it, more close to the nature, more
Closer to nature, more in tune with nature. Yeah, definitely.
so in that from this point of view, of course it is very interesting, but so like in everything there is other side of the medal. So they don't like some changings and things like that. Of course, all of they have got internet now and things like that, but people there in countryside, they don't like to change something. Maybe it is something like yes, protection. So the matter of survivement, the tool of survivement also. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I understand what you mean. Denise, what about you? What do you think are those advantages and disadvantages of rural life?
Personally, for me, the most advantage is to be close to nature, because in a city, it's sometimes insufficient to be in some green place. I like to go to a park or in some forest place near the city, if possible. So it's a more comfortable for feeling. It's a more comfortable environment. Another thing, it's a food, because the count of people in the city caused a rather specific industrial type of food supply. So we can only obtain some foods which transported on from a long distance and as stored well. So part of fresh vegetables or something else are inaccessible in the big cities, or accessible but in small count or something else. So more natural and fresh food is some benefit living at rural place. Another option, it's a strange thing, but I find that in a city there are impossible to find a place where it will be a clear sky at night. When I was young, I was interested in astronomy and trying to view some nearby planets and even make photos throughout a telescope. And it's hard to continue doing in Moscow because night sky is full of light and it's impossible to view properly. It's a small nuance, but when I out of city, every time I find that the sky is really full of stars, and it's a different.
Yeah, I mean that is it's a huge contrast. It is. It is. It is. I mean, especially I don't know where I am right now. I'm right by a major airport, and it means that if you look up into the sky, you see lights in the sky all the time, and they're not stars; they're airplanes. Whereas if you drive, I don't know, you have to drive quite far to get away from the city lights and everything else out into the desert, maybe, and then you see those stars. So yeah, that is a big difference in just your feeling about where you are in the universe.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I think those are the sort of things. Yes, those are advantages. It's again, really being aware of where you are in the universe, in life, and everything else, because you're very much more in touch with nature. I remember, just being at the dacha too. You hear the birds and crickets, or just everything. You hear all these sounds. And maybe a train in the distance or something like that. Whereas if you're in the city, you're hearing maybe sirens and cars, and it's a much different sort of just feeling and cycle and rhythm. Drawbacks with a rural setting, I think, I don't know. There is so much that you have to be involved in, right? I mean, like we talk about having the access to fresh food and stuff like that. Yes, it's there, but you have to work for it. So I think maybe if you've got other obligations, maybe if you're working in a city, I know that a lot of people who try to work in cities and then live in the countryside, and that's the commute and everything else. But what they realize is that they don't have enough time to do both. And it's, again, maybe not a drawback, but more like a reality. Otherwise, yeah, the fact that you've got other maybe more natural things to contend with too. If there's a flood or if there's a drought or something like that, that's going to affect your food supply, and that's something you've got to take into consideration, because that's, I mean, not only uncomfortable but can be very dangerous too. Whereas in cities there are maybe announcements and ways to evacuate people in the event of an emergency or something like that. In a smaller setting, the infrastructure just doesn't really exist, and you've got to wonder about that too. Safety, if God forbid you have to get to a hospital or something, how far you are from some place where you can get medical help. Those are another sort of drawback, and a reason that I know why a lot of people who were living in those countrysides as they got older, some of them, not everyone, because some people want to, be on the land that they've lived on their whole life. But I know a lot of people who are looking to move to the cities when they got to that pension age, when they were older, when they knew that they were going to have to go to doctors more often. I mean, that was like their life choice, that was what they felt they needed to do. And you had a lot of people that were looking to move into cities then. So I don't know. I mean, drawbacks, I guess you can call them drawbacks. You can call them just the realities of so many different circumstances that exist. But maybe this gets us to another question, which is a little more abstract. And then that is, how do you define high standards of life? Denise, to you, what are high standards of life? What is that quality of living? What does there need to be for it to fall into your definition?
A hard question. High standards of life for me, it's about things that I shouldn't spend time or doing something for many things when I live in a city than only work. I usually have a boiled water or cold water. I usually have a good electricity supply. I shouldn't spend much time to go to a shop and buy some foods. And I have a good and comfortable environment around my house. So for me, it's mostly about this thing. And also, it's access to some, I can't find some common description word, but to theater, museums, conferences, to any interesting people and information. It's only simple access. It's all possible in countryside or in different places, but in city it's a more simple.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. That simplicity, that ease of life, making things easy. I think that's definitely something that we've become.
And you can concentrate on important things for you, not for support life or
survival. Exactly. Interest as opposed to needs. That's what I think. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Surviving is the first step. Second step is a minimum comfortable life, which is not spend any time in good environment, but spend time in a old environment or in some unfinished supply or something else.
Yeah, definitely. Elliot, what about you? How do you define this high standard of life, quality of life? What is it to you?
No, it's a really difficult question because I think mostly high standard of life connected with some luxury equipment, luxury houses, nature. When you've got a big house somewhere in the countryside, but with good access to a big city, with a big swimming pool and a forest and maybe mountains and maybe even ocean nearby. But I think, of course, these all are things very important and pleasant and valuable, of course. But I think that the high standard of life can be also somewhere very inside. So if you feel yourself happy, if you've got people around yourself, a happy family, um, children, and I don't know, wife, husband, mother, father around you, and meet each other, you can sit and have a nice dinner and just simply talk with each other and be happy, admiring, I don't know, sunsets and things like that. It is also very, I think, a high standard of life too. So I think that high standard of life, it's that the feeling of happiness, and everyone decides for him or herself what is it. So if you feel inside that you are happy, so that is good. So you reach your high standard of life. I think it's very personal.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a very thoughtful answer, Alia. Very, very thoughtful in terms of how it is a very individual thing. Of course, it is. I mean, this is a question that has no right or wrong answer, but yeah, it's about how you feel, and that's I think why people live in so many different types of settings and what have you. Me personally, I think the most when it comes to quality of life, I don't know. It's like for me, I think I would define it as just not being stressed. And again, stress is something that people feel in different ways. Some people, they're going to be stressed if they're out working in fields, you know, doing their harvesting or working on their crops or something like that. Other people are going to be stressed sitting in traffic to get to an office where you're sitting and, you know, slaving over a computer. I mean, it's again a very individual thing. For me, it's really a matter of finding that balance and doing what you feel like you're naturally inclined to do, right? Not forcing yourself to do something that drains you. And this is what I'm realizing more and more, just living in urban environments and yet having the opportunity to go to those rural settings. I feel a huge difference. And all of the benefits of living in the urban life. I mean, the things that we've mentioned, you know, like maybe having the electricity and the water and the schools and culture and everything like that. I feel like even having all those things, I feel more stressed in the city environment and so stressed at times that it would be better for my family to go to a place where we don't have those things, where we are in touch with nature, where we're growing our own food, where we have a couple of chickens for eggs and, you know, meat if necessary. Not quite sure about cows and pigs and stuff yet, because, you know, it's a bit bigger when you got the mammals to deal with. But I don't know, somehow it just feels to me like the sort of things that I grew up understanding as being quality of life, having the sort of money to go to the store and buy all of the groceries and food you need, somehow to me, I don't know, it's kind of a weird situation, but I feel I am the most stressed during the day when I'm out shopping. Okay, forget about shopping like clothes or, you know, that sort of luxury sort of stuff. No, I'm talking about going to the store to buy milk, eggs, basic things. It's something that really, really stresses me out. And then I wonder, well, this is supposed to be a luxury. Having this store to go and buy my food is supposed to be a luxury. And I really don't feel that it is. So again, I mean, it's an individual thing. I think that we change over time. I think that a lot of different factors can cause us to just really reevaluate what we value, what we deem as quality of life. But unfortunately, I mean, as much as I really want to be in touch with nature, I still will say 100% that I still need access to the internet and electricity. I need it because it's just, you know, the reality again of modern life, how I do my work and everything else. And I don't know, I'm not perfectly rural. So there are certain expectations I have. And for me, that is part of a quality of life. It's having a good telecommunications network. And I mean, maybe that seems a bit superficial, but I think that in today's day and age, it's not just about being able to call your friend and talk. No, it's a matter of having access to information. It's a matter of getting in contact with, I don't know, a medical professional if you need them or something like that. And it's maybe, I think that if we see telecommunications grow, and in some parts of the world, you know, it's amazing. You can be out in the middle of nowhere and there's still a decent mobile internet connection. I mean, you can get in touch if you're basically in the wilderness. That's not the case everywhere. And I think that if we see better coverage, coverage of rural areas, I think we're going to see a lot more people that are willing to go out and live in those areas and feel that they have a comfortable way of life. But again, these are all these things that it costs money. It costs money, and I think there needs to be a great enough demand for it to make financial sense for it to happen. But we'll see what happens over the next 10, 20 years. But I'm just looking at these cities and they're overflowing with people, and we'll see. What about suburban life? Okay, the suburbs. Do you think it's a good compromise? Elia, what do you think about suburban life? Is it a good compromise between the city and the countryside? I mean, I think, Denise, you were talking about this part of the city where it was, you know, the dirt roads and everything else. Well, Elia, what do you think? I mean, do you think that this suburbs is a good compromise?
I think yes, it becomes a good compromise. That's why the land in the suburbs become more and more popular, and as a result, more expensive. Because you can live not far from big city, so you can take part in all movements in all that city life, but at the same time you can come back home, enjoy that silence, because it is really different, the silence in the city, so night in the city and night somewhere in the suburb, because it is absolute silence, really, so enjoyable silence when there are only nature sounds around. uh, yes, so it is really wonderful, and when you can see that birds singing around you in the morning. Of course you can hear birds singing in a city too, but they mix with other sounds, and the smell of the air is also different. So of course there is very bad side of that, that you should spend 2-3 hours to get to that suburban house, and if you do it every day, I think it is very difficult to live in such a rhythm. But I know that some people do, and they prefer to just to get their suburban house, to get their 5-6 hours of being in nature. So I think yes, that's good compromise.
Okay. Okay. Denise, what do you think? Do you think it's a good compromise, this suburban life?
To me, it's a good compromise if there are very good transport infrastructure, because if suburban areas have bad accessibility by transport from a city, it's have no benefits, only negatives. Like a rather crowded area, it's not really close to nature, because suburban areas are usually like small city buildings and something like this, are not a nature territory. It is some kind of small town territory. And if you have no good access to a big city, it's no benefits. But if really good accessible, and it's possible to spend the same time as you live in a city, it's a really good compromise. So for me, the most important question is transport accessibility.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's absolutely true. That transportation. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the suburban option, alternative, compromise, whatever you want to call it. I grew up in what I guess would always considered to be the suburbs. And what I see now is that, okay, this is over how many years, 20, 20, 30 years. What used to be houses, that sort of compromise, that sort of living outside of the city. What's happened now is that houses and maybe basic little shops and stuff like that have been taken down, and what's being built in their place are apartment buildings. So basically the suburbs are turning into just an extension of the city, like a proper extension of the city, not just the, well, proverbial suburb. So I don't know. I mean, I look at stuff like that and I think, well, how much of a compromise is it really? I think about that too. For example, there is a small university, whatever, what I always thought was a small university in this suburban town where I grew up. Well, now it's become a huge university, and it means that there are more and more students that are here. So the neighborhood where I grew up is now home to their houses or their rooms to students at universities because there's no proper dormitory. And it's all these very interesting things, how things change over time and that sort of thing. And when I was living in Russia, I actually bought an apartment outside of Moscow. Not even, well, it was in that Moscow region, and it was quite far away from the city. And it was, a normal flat, but I liked it because it was a 5-story building, and it was right across from the school. There was a playground in front. There were shops where you could walk to, small shops, and just really kind of nice area to live in. Definitely, I mean, not a village, not a proper city, but a town, like a good sized town. And as you talked about, Denise, the transportation, okay, there was, you just had to walk 15 minutes to the electric train station and you could get to Moscow. And well, it depends. An hour if you were on the express train, which I never caught, or maybe about 2 hours if you were, or an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how many stops there were. But again, I mean, that adds up over time. And when you think, figure all that in, how much time are you spending on transportation? Even if the transportation is well connected, I'm telling you, the trains, are a great option. It still takes a long time. And then you have to really wonder if that commute time is worthwhile. And that's anywhere, if you're living outside of a city and you're driving in, driving out, taking a bus, taking a train, any of these things. So yeah, again, transportation and accessibility and the traffic too, because you can have perfect transportation lines, but if there are so many cars on the roads, or this is also another thing, so many people on a form of public transportation like a train or a subway, that's also gonna, really kind of interfere with your life. I mean, I don't know if you want to be sandwiched in a sardine can, with people for an hour on an express train. I mean, that to me is not really a good alternative. But, again, you just have to take benefits and the consequences and just kind of weigh them and balance them and see what works best for you. What about stereotypes of urban life? Do you think that you can think of any stereotypes of urban life? What it is that maybe people who live out in the countryside think about us that live in the city? Denise, what do you think? Do you think that you can think of anything?
I know one discussed living at urban side with the people from village or rural side, but I meet some real stereotypes when I relocate from Rostov to Moscow, because most of my friends think that in Moscow I will usually spend more than 2 hours to go to office at one side. And really, before I changed my workplace, I spent only near 40 minutes from one door to another. So it was a real stereotype. I usually spend a smaller time than I walk to store after I relocate, because metro is a very good and fast transport, than a bus ride, high traffic. Next stereotype is about urban environment, because the same idea was Moscow is like a concrete jungle. There is no pleasure place to walk, a small park and so on. But really, in Moscow, there are a big amount of really big and beautiful parks and interesting territories where very good to walk. So that was two stereotypes I really limited my life.
Yeah, no, those sound pretty normal. Elliot, what about you? Can you think of any of those stereotypes that the people in rural environments have about those of us who live in the cities?
I don't know whether they're stereotypes or not, but I think that sometimes it is true that people in big cities, they are very fast and maybe more how to say it, more distanced from the nature. So they, how to say it properly in English, maybe not so much soul they've got in there. So
Okay, yes, so they're not really, again, not in tune with nature, maybe out of touch with nature. You could say something like that.
They can't feel something. They say that all that things naive and not worth thinking, or just being upset about such things. And the same things can be very important for the people who live in countryside, and they really think that that is important, and can feel upset about that and be unhappy. So I think that the feelings are more developed in the people who live in countryside, but but it is not always so. And on the other hand, that people in countryside, they are not very fast. It is very difficult for them to make decisions and to change something in their life, in their surroundings life, just even to move, to travel. Sometimes, if to take example, for example, my relatives from the countryside, they travel too little, and they can't even imagine why do they should why should they spend so much time and money to visit something abroad. They think that they got everything around and they're happy about that. But not all people in the countryside also think so. So I think it is also depends on person. But I think there are such kinds of stereotype exist.
Yeah, definitely. You've got both those. You cover both of those. That when people are thinking about people in the city, what they think about is that they can't do anything. You know, I remember so many times I would maybe even just go to the dacha, right? And I would come and bring food with me, right? And the neighbors would just laugh. I mean, the difference is because it was a kind of interesting dacha settlement, because there are people around me who are, yes, just what these dachniki, you know, these people who came to be dachas. But there were also people in that area that lived there all year round. So they were very self-sufficient, and it was basically, you know, like a village setting for them. And they had their own crops, and they were growing everything themselves, and, you know, bringing food just didn't make any sense. So that was sort of the thing. It's like we don't know how to do things because we are so dependent on that sort of thing. Another thing, like Denise mentioned, the time that you're spending in transportation. Another one, which maybe it's not exactly a rural stereotype about urban dwellers, but more, this is interesting too. When I moved to Moscow from St. Petersburg, I remember just the people that I knew in St. Petersburg who were going and saying, well, you just don't have time anymore. You're in Moscow. People don't have time for their lives when they live in Moscow. And I thought, what do you realize too? Again, Elliot, what you were talking about slowness of people. Just after living in Moscow for several months and getting used to the sort of pace of life there and, how fast everything works, I remember how frustrated I was and realizing how slow people in St. Petersburg were just using the metro because, that's the thing. The more people there are around you, the faster you're going to have to think, have to act, because you don't have the time, like you're saying, to like just slow down and do that sort of thing. So I would say, yeah, I mean, that's the sort of stereotypes that people have about those who live in the city. You have to be busy and you have to be quick, but then at the same time, you don't have the ability to take care of things on your own. You're not that self-sufficient, like I was talking about before. Again, I think then when it comes to stereotypes of people in rural settings, yeah, it's usually that they're slow, maybe, they're not so cultured because they don't have like theaters and schools and stuff like that, as many as there are in cities, although it's no guarantee, of course. What else? Maybe... Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much what it is. Denise, what about you? What do you think about the stereotypes there are people who live in the rural setting?
To me, it's hard to split my stereotypes and real properties and real differences of people who lived in countryside. Probably... I don't know what can be really a stereotype. I think one thing it's a rhythm of life, because from city viewpoint looks like country dwellers are doing many things slowly, especially if he appears in metro, for example, or in some crowded situation. But really, living in a village full of important and necessary jobs. So really, not in city, in its own homes, people doing his job and the important things fast and well. The first thing, and second, I don't know. I think I can split what I think about and what stereotypes and what is not.
No, that's a fair answer. Okay. What about, I don't know if you got to this part in the material, but like one of the things that they define urban areas is having access to coffee shops. Like that's the thing, if there are coffee shops everywhere. So how important is open access to coffee shops for you? I think it's a kind of funny question. Like, is that something that you define as being living in a city? Is that important? Is that one of the important things for you? Denise, what do you think?
For me, it's if you live in a city, access to coffee shop is very important to you because it allows to spend not so many time in some cases to get a coffee, for example, to eat something between different activities. But in countryside, the most jobs and most things are concentrated around your home. So in that case, it's a simple way to boil coffee yourself.
Yeah.
Or yes, to get some food. So coffee shops, it's a attribute of a big city and city life, of course.
Okay. Elia, what about you? How important is coffee?
You know, I don't drink coffee at all, so that is not important for me at all. So I drink tea. If there were tea shops, that would be important. But I think in city it is interesting sometimes to go out somewhere on Fridays, on different place, different environment, to see different people, just to chat and eat together and to spend time pleasantly. So I think it's a good idea. And when you live in countryside, the surroundings is always the same. So that is not so interesting.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the coffee shop thing kind of makes me laugh a little bit just because, I was living in this very small town, which was definitely not a city, and it was much more like the countryside. Even though that there were houses next to each other, there were a lot of people, but it was still not a city by any means, not a town by any means either. But yet this little settlement even had a coffee shop that was walking distance from where I was living. So when I hear that, I kind of laugh because it's like, all right, there was a coffee shop there too, and this was definitely not a city. But again, I think it's just part of that maybe Croatian culture of having to have coffee shops, which is a bit different. But I don't know. To me personally, it's not so important. If I want coffee, I'll drink it at home. And if I go out, I usually drink tea too. I'm more of a tea person like you, Elia. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this. It was an interesting discussion we had. Do we have any ideas for next time?
Oh, I have no ideas. I need some pause to generate new ideas.
Pause for generation of new ideas. Ellie, do you have anything in mind?
I don't know. I've got very philosophic and broad theme. I don't know whether maybe we can make it more, I don't know, more short, not shorter, more concrete.
For
Maybe about freedom. So when and where can we feel ourselves free or not free, and what is it depend on? I don't know how to formulate that correctly.
Oh, okay. That's a really very, like you said, a very philosophical topic. Freedom. Yeah. I mean, that's something to discuss. I don't know, Denise, do you feel comfortable discussing it?
Yes, I
Okay.
like this topic.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of interesting things. I'll think of what to do. Okay, so we'll plan for freedom next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you very much, Denise. Thank you very much, Daniela.
Okay, thank you, Edith. Thank you, Denise. I've got freedom next time, and yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too. Goodbye.
Bye bye.